So the first conversation I had with my father was when I was 20. I was a junior in college, was at a library, and decided to look him up in the phone book. Found his name in San Antonio. Actually, I found another number of states where I looked through, but found him in San Antonio, called him up, and that was our first conversation. He said in closing, we'll stay in touch. And as things turned out, we didn't. Fate would have it that I moved to Texas to work for the state of Fort Worth several years later, and actually had a conference down in San Antonio. So I got to town, I called up the number again and said I was in town and wanted to meet him. And he asked if I wanted to come over to the house that evening, and I said no, that maybe the last night of the conference I could get away and we could visit. So we met the last night of the conference on a Wednesday night. It was a Marriott, San Antonio, downtown San Antonio. It was my first interaction, engagement with my dad. And it was something that I couldn't describe. It just felt like, so that person is a part of me, or I'm a part of that person. And we spoke for a while, and he said, you'll stay in touch, and as things turned out, we didn't. So before we left the state of Texas, and that would have been, I was 29 at that point, I called him up and said that we were heading back to Kansas, and had two grandchildren that wanted to know if he wanted to meet them. And he said, of course. And so we went down that weekend, got to meet him, got to meet my mother, stepmother, and I also got to meet two sisters that I didn't know existed. And my stepmother was a little emotional that evening, and I couldn't understand why. And finally he told me, we just buried your brother last week. So I didn't know that I had had a brother, but we lost him to an overdose. He said, we'll stay in touch, but this time he did. He and my stepmother drove up to Kansas several months later, visited, and we stayed in touch sporadically over the next several years. And then about 3 years later, I got a call, and they told me that he was in the hospital, and said no one told me. And so I made the decision to delay my visit to the hospital by a couple of weeks. Work was kind of intense, and they called and said, you know, he didn't make it. He's not getting out of the hospital. So that following week, I drove down to San Antonio and went to the funeral. And so the short period of time that I had him in my life, it was an exciting period of time. I got to know a little bit about him. He was Army veteran, career Army, but would have liked to have known more about him. Would have liked to have shared more about me with him. But I suspect that there are other people who don't have the opportunity to actually get to meet their dad. And so if there's an opportunity, or if you're delaying on a visit, I would definitely strongly encourage you not to waste time. We just don't know how much time there is.